Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Friday, November 11th. And Canadians paid their respects to the country's war heroes at somber Remembrance Day ceremonies across the country today. In Ottawa, thousands of people wearing poppies stood in silence as cannons boomed and military aircraft flew past the National War Memorial as the clock on the Peace Tower struck 11 a.m. Navy Captain Bonita Mason thanked the families who have supported and suffered alongside Canadian Armed Forces members. She also called on Canadians to set aside their divisions and embrace the spirit of reconciliation. The national ceremony also marked the 80th anniversary of the ill-fated attack on Dieppe, in which 916 Canadians died in a single day. Similar scenes played out at cenotaphs and war memorials across the rest of the country. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is heading for Southeast Asia. This is for a series of summits aimed at deepening Canada's presence in the Indo-Pacific. He is joined by Trade Minister Mary Ng and Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly, with a first stop in Cambodia. Mr. Trudeau arrived today at the Leaders' Summit of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. This is where the group of 10 countries is negotiating a trade agreement with Canada. On Monday, Mr. Trudeau heads for Indonesia for the G20 summit in Bali. He will later move to Thailand for a meeting of APEC leaders before heading to Tunisia. Some badly needed emergency supplies of children's pain and fever medication are expected to arrive soon at hospitals that are overwhelmed by various respiratory illnesses. Health Canada says special imports of ibuprofen from the U.S. are awaiting distribution. This while acetaminophen imports from Australia are imminent. The extraordinary measures follow a months-long shortage of children's pain and fever medication, which has led to limited supplies at retailers, hospitals, and pharmacies. Privacy watchdogs in Quebec and Alberta have received data breach reports from Sobeys. The company started having computer issues last weekend, which affected customers trying to get prescriptions at some of its pharmacies. Quebec's Access to Information Commission says it received a declaration of a confidentiality incident, and that's when there is unauthorized access, use, or loss of personal information or any other breach of the protection of this information. All right, turning to Ontario, where the Labour Relations Board says the provincial government has withdrawn its application to have a walkout by 55,000 education workers declared as illegal. The workers, represented by the Canadian Union of Public Employees, walked off the job last Friday. Now, this was after the government passed legislation that imposed a contract and banned a strike. On Monday, Premier Doug Ford promised to rescind the legislation if the workers ended their job action. And QP said employees would be back at work the next day. The walkout had shut hundreds of schools to in-person learning. QP and the government returned to the bargaining table on Tuesday, and negotiations are ongoing. Back in Quebec, police in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu have arrested a man and a woman after a junior college was locked down this morning. No one was injured. Police responded to a call about a man acting suspiciously on campus, and they told students and staff to barricade themselves into rooms and to keep the lights off. Police say they evacuated the college. All right, switching gears to new data indicating that Canada is producing as much carbon dioxide as it was before the pandemic. This with emissions rising 3% last year. Carbon emissions fell sharply during the first year of the pandemic, dropping nearly 10% in 2020. The European Emissions Database for Global Atmospheric Research reports this. It says by the end of this year, the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere will be 51% higher than in pre-industrial times. Moving to Alberta now, where officials with Banff National Park are trying to determine what's next for a herd of Plains bison, which were reintroduced into its backcountry in 2017. A draft report on the 5-year pilot project was published online this week. It says the herd has grown to more than 80 animals. This from the original 16 that were relocated from Elk Island National Park near Edmonton. The draft report recommends the bison herd remain in the national park. Parks Canada is now taking feedback from the public, including nearby Indigenous communities, on the management of the bison for the next 10 years. Canada has qualified for the FIBA World Cup. Cassius Robertson's 16-point performance helped Canada's men's basketball team past Venezuela 94-56. The World Cup will be held in Indonesia, Japan, and the Philippines next summer. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Forum Daily's energy update with GasWizard.ca. Dan McTeague joins us shortly after the break, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Up now, we'll be having our weekly energy update with Dan McTeague, Senior Petroleum Analyst at GasWizard.ca. Take it away, Dan.
Well, good to be here, Nima. What a week it's been. We saw prices for oil and for gasoline and diesel move up and only to fall once again. And much of this really based on what I have considered to be a true head fake. Like China's playing games with oil. Every time there's a concern about oil prices going through the roof, China pretends there's going to be some kind of a lockdown that causes prices to drop. At least that's the way, of course, some of the traders not physically involved with oil and gas tend to operate. So the headlines have China saying they're going to a major lockdown. Prices have dropped. We hear this morning, November the 11th, Friday, that in fact it won't be as big as expected. Oil prices go back up. I think it's pretty clear that sooner or later, investors, those involved with oil trades, are going to have to wake up and smell the proverbial coffee because there is a shortage. And no matter what caps are being placed on Russian oil and what sanctions are being implemented, ultimately, these will have the effect of driving up prices. So let's unparcel what's happened across the country. We've seen prices in Vancouver drop 10 cents a liter, go back up 4 cents a liter. We've seen in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, prices moderate a little bit, down maybe 2 cents a liter. The expectation is they'll probably go up another 2 or 3 cents next week. Ontario, of course, has seen prices as high as 177, drop down to 165, now moving back up probably 3 or 4 cents a liter this week. Ditto for Quebec, which of course has seen prices, drop below $1.80, now moving back up above $1.80. And in all of this, from east to west, diesel prices have moderated dramatically, but not so in the Maritimes. So let's talk about the Atlantic because it's a very serious situation unfolding there. This is the result of years of underinvestment, refineries being told by the federal government in Canada, the U.S. government, that they're going to have a war on fossil fuels. So no one's reinvesting in refineries. And guess what? Demand is there. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to respond to that demand because the refineries have been shut down. Philadelphia lost 2 refineries, and of course, the Come By Chance refinery in Newfoundland. Speaking of Newfoundland, interesting that the regulated prices there continue to punish consumers. There was a prediction that I made that was going to drop 3, 4, 5 cents a liter. No, the bureaucrats decided in Newfoundland to ding motorists by an increase of about 7 or 8 cents a liter, and the following day today, drop it by what it should have been to begin with, a 5-cent decrease. So look, no easy way of explaining this, Nima, but the reality is that as long as we have civil servants trying to determine what the market is doing, and as long as we have a market that behaves based on algorithms and based on fake headlines run out of China, we're going to continue to have this significant disconnect between supply and demand and fundamentals. And what that means is, more dangerously, less supply and much higher prices as we head into the colder months. And that, of course, is the story of the week. Temperatures are starting to change in North America. They will do so in Europe. And that means that hold on tight, because diesel prices are going to rise. Home heating oil, furnace oil is going to rise, stove oil. And for those who believe that there's no consequence because they have propane or electricity or natural gas, those prices tend to follow very shortly thereafter. Well, that's it for this week, Nima. We'll talk to you next week. Back to you.
All right, thanks for that, Dan. Again, that was Dan McTeague, Senior Petroleum Analyst at GasWizard.ca. He's also the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. All right, well, in other news, the Biden administration has ramped up its efforts to reduce methane emissions. It is targeting the oil and gas industry for its role in global warming. This even as President Joe Biden has pressed energy producers for more oil drilling to lower prices at the gasoline pump. At a global climate conference in Egypt on Friday, Mr. Biden announced a supplemental rule which cracks down on emissions of methane. The new Environmental Protection Agency rule follows up on a methane rule that the Democratic president announced last year. The American Exploration and Production Council represents the largest independent oil and gas companies in the U.S., and it says that it appreciates the changes made by the EPA. Well, this comes as German lawmakers have approved a plan to keep the country's 3 remaining nuclear plants until mid-April. Now, that will extend their life beyond the originally planned shutoff at the end of this year. The lower house of parliament voted to approve the extension on Friday. The vote came after Chancellor Olaf Scholz last month ordered ministers to prepare the plan. Mr. Scholz put his foot down on an issue that had divided his 3-party government. The decision comes as Germany tries to prevent a possible energy crunch this winter due to cuts in fuel supplies from Russia over the war in Ukraine. All right, we'll be right back after the break. And when we return, we're going to be taking a look at the latest big moves in the world of cryptocurrencies amid the collapse of FTX trading. So stay tuned. An interview with Catherine Murray up next. All right, welcome back. Now it's time for Forum Daily's weekly crypto and digital asset update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. Take it away, Catherine.
Thanks, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly crypto and digital asset update. I'm Catherine Murray. This week, of course, has been surrounding FTX, which we've learned this morning, in fact, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in a Delaware court. Just stepping back for a moment, at the beginning of the week, we did hear that there could be some liquidity issues with FTX, which is one of the largest crypto exchanges in the world. And there was hope that there would be a buyer of FTX, but that was withdrawn on Wednesday and has led to what we're learning this morning on Friday, that the founder, the 30-year-old billionaire founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, has in fact filed for bankruptcy court proceedings for FTX. Basically, we've wiped out about $32 billion just in a matter of days to zero. Again, there were withdrawals, demands, and a liquidity crunch. Also, approximately 130 additional affiliated companies are part of the proceedings. A lot of questions out there remain as to what this might mean in terms of contagion. And there are many institutional investors who have invested and been supporters of FTX, SoftBank and BlackRock. Also, crypto lender BlockFi has paused withdrawals as this is going through. Genesis Global Trading has noted that they have derivative exposure of about $175 million worth of capital locked on FTX, but it is not material. And we also know that Ontario Teachers Pension Fund has been an investor in FTX to the tune of about $95 million. Importantly as well, when we think about contagion in FTX, there were a lot of institutional investors in FTX versus retail. And so you might see some hedge funds that have also invested in crypto alongside equities, having to sell equities to cover some of the losses that they might be experiencing in the crypto space. Because cryptocurrencies have been under significant pressure on the back of all of this. You've actually seen Bitcoin trade with a $16,000 handle. You're seeing a lot of cryptocurrencies down by about 5-7%, but that follows quite a weak week for cryptocurrencies in terms of the performance. As I mentioned, a lot of institutional investors in FTX, somewhat different than what we saw in previous bankruptcies from Celsius as well as Three Arrows. Those were really geared towards retail investors that lost, whether it was $1,000 or $10,000, but they had a lot of retail investors that got hurt, again, from bankruptcies within the space. What does all of this mean? It likely means that we need to see regulators come in and regulate the space faster versus just studying the space. Obviously, this is very difficult to regulate. There's been a lot of controversy in terms of how to go about doing that, but hopefully that might speed up the process. And certainly in other news, we are watching Bitcoin miner Hut 8 report their third quarter results, worse than expected, coming in with an 11-cent loss. Hut 8 is traded on the TSX under the ticker HUT. And interestingly, when we think about mining, we know that it takes quite a bit of energy. And you've got energy company Shell signing a 2-year partnership with crypto media outlet Bitcoin Magazine to sponsor the 2023-2024 Miami-based Bitcoin conference. And the view here, of course, is to improve Bitcoin mining costs and reduce carbon emissions. So, Nima, I'll leave it there on a more positive note. Certainly, FTX is the story of the day, and we will continue to see how it unfolds. I'll leave it there. Back to you.
Thanks for that, Catherine. Again, that was Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, which airs on Sundays at 9 a.m. Eastern, only on the News Forum Network. All right, well, as Catherine mentioned, the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan says it invested $95 million US into a failing cryptocurrency exchange platform. The OTPP says it invested in FTX's international and U.S. arms so that it could gain small-scale exposure to an emerging area. FTX is now being investigated for potential securities violations, and customers are fleeing after concerns arose that it might not have enough capital. The Teachers Pension Plan says the investment represents less than half a percentage point of its total net assets. Meanwhile, the European Union's Executive Commission is predicting the 19 countries that use the euro currency will slide into a recession over the winter. The European Commission's autumn forecast says economic output will fall in both the fourth quarter of this year and the first months of 2023. It says high fuel and heating costs, record inflation, higher interest rates, and overall uncertainty are expected to tip the EU, the euro area, and most member states into recession in the last 3 months of the year. Stay with us. We'll be right back. And when we return, we're going to have the major news stories and headlines from around the world up next. So stay with us. Forum Daily will be back in a few short moments. This year's moments of silence and ceremonies in Europe to honor the memory of fallen soldiers looks a little different. They're happening as Russia's war in Ukraine shows that peace is all too often elusive. British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says as we salute our troops this year, peace has been shattered by a Russian aggressor. Armistice Day was marked from the smallest cemeteries in Flanders Fields in western Belgium to the Champs-Élysées in Paris and countless streets and offices beyond. Well, in the latest moves by Russia in its ongoing war, it has seen the country pull out of Kherson, which is its final foothold in a major city in southern Ukraine. The withdrawal clears the way for victorious Ukrainian forces to reclaim the country's only Russian-held provincial capital. Videos and photos on social media show residents taking to the streets and a Ukrainian flag flying over a monument in a central Kherson square. Now, this is for the first time since the city was seized in early March. Ukraine's president says special military units have entered the city. Meanwhile, as peace talks continue in Ethiopia, its lead negotiator is asserting that 70% of the country's northern Tigray region is now under military control, and that aid deliveries have resumed to the area. National Security Advisor Redwan Hussein tweeted the information on Friday. This comes as the talks continued in neighboring Kenya, but there is no immediate confirmation from aid workers or Tigray spokesmen. The United States is applying pressure on Ethiopia's government to swiftly deliver aid and basic services to the long cut-off region of more than 5 million people. Moving to Switzerland now, where top Russian and UN officials are meeting to try to reach a deal on allowing Ukrainian grain shipments and Russian food and fertilizer exports. A failure to renew a wartime agreement due to expire next week has raised some fears that a global food crisis will get worse. The deal is critical because Ukraine and Russia are major suppliers of wheat, barley, sunflower oil, and other food. This especially to parts of Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, where food prices are soaring. All right, turning to the latest developments in elections south of our border, which saw California Governor Gavin Newsom and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis claiming the mantle of freedom in their Election Day victories. Both men easily won second terms, governing two of America's most populous states. Mr. Newsom said voters affirmed that California is a true freedom state. Now, this is because women can choose to get an abortion. Mr. DeSantis said that Florida has been a citadel of freedom for people across the country who reject what he calls the woke agenda of the left. Both men's philosophies could one day compete in a presidential election. In its second chaotic week after billionaire Elon Musk took over, Twitter is once again adding gray official labels to some prominent accounts. The company had rolled out the labels earlier this week, only to kill them a few hours later. But last night, they were back again, at least for some accounts, including Twitter's own, as well as Amazon, Nike, and Coca-Cola. Scientists from the Global Carbon Project have released a new accounting of carbon dioxide emissions. It finds that heat-trapping gas pollution from fossil fuels went up about 1% more than last year. But there were some unusual twists. China, which has been increasing its emissions for years, went down almost 1%, probably because of pandemic lockdowns. The United States, which had seen dropping pollution levels for years, went up 1.5%. Now, this year, the world is on track to put 36.6 billion tons of carbon dioxide in the air from energy and cement use. Norwegian police report 2 people tried but failed to glue themselves to Edvard Munch's 1893 masterpiece, The Scream, at an Oslo museum. Now, this was while a third tried to film the stunt. Police were alerted by the National Museum of Norway and had 3 people under their control. The environmental activists were from the Norwegian organization Stop Oil Exploration. It was the latest incident of climate activists targeting famous paintings in European museums. Well, our favorite Canadian Jeopardy champ, Matea Roach, says her time with the franchise may not end with this season's Tournament of Champions. The 5th longest winning contestant in the American quiz show's history is back on television for the pre-tape tournament this week. The 24-year-old Halifax native, who now calls Toronto home, says she would jump at the chance to do it again. She called it the most fun she's had in her adult life. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could visit our website and follow us on social media. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.